She had commanded fleets. That was the thought that came to her as she lay in the snow, bleeding, her son pressed against her chest. Not a desperate thought, not a bitter one. Simply a fact, arriving quietly, the way all true things do when there is nothing left to protect you from them. Commander Maravel had once stood on the bridge of the Surfian Imperial flagship Ardent Sky and watched three enemy armadas break against her formations like water against stone. She had never lost a single engagement. Not one. In 19 years of service to the Empire, she had made the impossible look like routine. Her officers called her the architect. Her enemies called her something they whispered, never shouted, because shouting it would have meant admitting how thoroughly she had dismantled them. Now she could not feel her left hand. The snow fell in thick, indifferent curtains across the Brooks Range of Alaska. Burying what remained of the scout ship behind her, the crash had stripped away the hull plating on the port side, torn the engine housing completely free, and left a scar of black metal and melted ice stretching 40 meters across the mountainside. The ship was dead. Its emergency beacon had fired once, a single pulse into the frozen sky, then gone dark when the power cells cracked on impact and the last reserves drained into the permafrost below. Mara had pulled Kyle from the wreckage herself, one arm. Her left shoulder had been dislocated in the impact, the joint grinding bone on bone with every movement. She had not made a sound. She had wrapped her son in the only intact thermal layer she could find, pulled him against her body, and walked until her legs stopped cooperating. That had been 4 hours ago. Now she sat with her back against a formation of ice-crusted granite, Kyle unconscious in her arms, his breathing shallow and wrong in a way that a commander with 2 decades of battlefield medicine behind her could identify precisely and wish she could not. He was 6 years old. His skin, the pale blue of deep ocean water, had taken on a grayish cast that she recognized with the cold precision of someone who had studied the physiology of dying in every context military service had required of her. Hypothermia, advancing. His small body had been built for the warmth of Surfian homeworlds, for the heavy amber light of a double star system, for heat so constant and complete that it was simply part of the air you breathed. Not this. Not this brutal, airless cold that reached inside you and turned your blood into something slower and darker than it was meant to be. Not this silence that was not peaceful but predatory. The silence of a landscape that did not care whether you lived inside it or became part of it. She pulled him closer, shifted so that what remained of her body heat was concentrated against his chest, his face tucked into the hollow of her neck. She could feel his heartbeat. It was there. Faint, irregular is the way that cold made things irregular, but present. She had made a decision 3 hours ago when she realized the thermal pack in her emergency kit had been destroyed in the crash, its casing crushed beyond function by a falling support strut. She had made it with the same calm she brought to every decision, the same systematic elimination of alternatives that had made her what she was. Her body retained more core heat than his. The physics were simple and brutal. If she went into the final stages of exposure first, she could transfer that heat to him in the last minutes. Buy him time. Perhaps enough time for something she could not calculate, which was whether anything would find them before the mathematics finished their work. It was not a sacrifice born of desperation. It was a commander making the only rational choice available to her given the resources remaining. So she had closed her eyes. And she had waited. The wind moved across the mountain in long, low sweeps, packing new snow against her side. The cold had passed through the stage of pain and into something almost quiet. She knew that too. She knew exactly what it meant. The body stopped fighting and the stillness felt briefly like rest, like resolution, like the thing that waited at the end of every calculation when all the variables had finally resolved. She thought about the Empire, about the night it ended 14 days ago in a coordinated strike so precise it could only have come from someone who knew every system from the inside. The Capital, the Fleet Command networks, the Imperial Archive, 3 centuries of accumulated knowledge about every civilization the Empire had ever encountered. All of it gone in 3 hours. And the hand behind it was one she had shaken 1,000 times, one she had trusted without question, because some things you believe are simply solid, the way you believe the ground beneath your feet is solid, and then someone removes the ground and the believing is all that falls. She did not let herself finish that thought. Not here. Not now. She thought about Kyle instead. About the way he laughed too loud at things that weren't quite that funny, his whole small body involved in the laughter, undignified and complete. About the way he'd learned to salute by watching her officers through the viewport of her ready room, standing in the corridor with his silver hair falling across his forehead, trying to hold himself very straight, the seriousness of his expression undercut entirely by the fact that he was also clearly delighted with himself. About how she had pretended not to find it the most devastating thing she had ever seen. She pressed her face against the top of his head. His hair smelled of cold and engine smoke, and something beneath both of those that was simply him, that particular warmth that lived under everything else, that she would know in any darkness. She did not say, "I'm sorry" out loud. She held it instead the way she held everything that mattered, close and private and not for performance. Commanders did not say things like that, but she felt it with everything she had left, which was less than it had been an hour ago and diminishing. Then she heard it. Footsteps in the snow. Slow, deliberate, heavy-booted, placed with care. The sound of someone who knew exactly how treacherous this terrain was and was moving through it with the specific respect of a person who had learned that respect the hard way. Her eyes opened. The discipline came back instantly, automatic as breathing, which was one of the things 19 years of military command did to a person. It made the reflex of assessment faster than the reflex of fear. She cataloged everything in the first 2 seconds. Single figure, thermal gear, orange and gray, the orange of search operations. Moving from the northeast, following the line of the crash scar in the snow. Carrying something large on his back, an equipment pack, substantial. He had not called out, had not announced himself. That was either the behavior of someone cautious or someone predatory, and she had learned long ago that predatory things move differently, hungrily, with a particular quality of attention directed outward, seeking. This man was moving with attention directed inward, at the terrain, at his own placement in it. He was tall by human standards, wide through the shoulders in the specific way of someone who had spent years carrying weight and was still carrying it even when his hands were empty. His beard was heavy and dark, threaded with frost at the edges. When he stopped and saw her, he went very still. Not the stillness of shock, the stillness of someone who was rapidly recalculating and doing it without showing his work, which was a discipline Mara recognized because she practiced it herself. He looked at her face, her blue skin, her silver hair, her eyes, which were a shade of pale amber that did not exist in any human spectrum. He looked at Kale. He took in the crash wreckage behind her with a single comprehensive sweep of his gaze, reading it the way a person reads a situation rather than a scene. Then he said very quietly, "Well," a pause. Not the pause of someone searching for words, but the pause of someone deciding which words were actually necessary. "That explains the radar signature." He crouched down to her eye level, both hands open and visible at his sides, which was a gesture she recognized across species lines because it was about intent, not language. He did not reach for her, did not move toward Kyle. His eyes were steady, alert in a way that was not aggressive. The gaze of someone who was paying complete attention and had decided to keep his conclusions open until he had more information. "My name is Garrett Calloway," he said, "Search and Rescue, Brooks Range District." She tried to speak. What came out was not words. The cold had done something to the coordination between intention and execution that she did not have the resources to fight right now. He moved after that, fast and quiet and without hesitation, the pack off his back in one fluid motion, open before it hit the ground. Emergency thermal blankets, the crinkled foil kind that looked flimsy and performed beyond their appearance. He went for Kale first. He wrapped the child before he touched Mara, and she watched that with something she could not immediately name, because no one whose priorities she had not personally established had ever, in her experience, made exactly the right choice without being told what the right choice was. The instinct was correct and unperformed. He did not think about it. He simply did it. He wrapped Kyle with practiced hands, tucked the edges under with the efficiency of someone who had done this before in conditions that did not allow for second attempts. Then he pulled a portable heat core from a padded case in the pack, activated it with a twist of his wrist, and slid it close to the child's body. A low hum filled the cold air. Warmth, actual warmth, began to radiate outward in a small, determined circle. Kale's eyelids moved. Mara exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. The exhale was not controlled. It simply happened, which told her something about how close to the edge she had come. Calloway wrapped her next, efficient and without commentary. He worked around her injured shoulder without being told it was injured. Simply read the way she was holding it, the micro adjustments in her posture, and adapted his approach accordingly. When the thermal blanket was secure, he sat back on his heels and studied her face with the same comprehensive attention he had given the crash site. "The kid yours," she managed. "Yes." "Okay." He glanced at the wreckage, then back at her. "I'm going to ask you one question, and I need a straight answer." She waited. "Who's looking for you?" The question arrived precisely. Not "what are you" or "where did you come from" or the dozen panicked or reflexive questions an unprepared person might have asked, standing in the Alaskan wilderness looking at something that didn't belong in any category of his experience. He had gone straight to the operational concern, the thing that determined whether the current situation was manageable or immediately dangerous. The thing that a person who had worked in hostile environments asked when they understood that the environment was not always the primary threat. She looked at him for a moment, this human with frost in his beard and hands that had stopped moving only when there was nothing more immediately useful for them to do. She said, "Someone who should not have survived." He nodded once, as if that were a complete answer, as if he had heard things in that shape before and understood what they meant without requiring elaboration. "Then we need to move," he said. He helped her to her feet, and she let him, which was itself a significant data point about her condition, because Maravel did not accept help with standing under normal circumstances. He took Kyle against his chest with a care that was not gentle in the way of someone unfamiliar with the weight of a child, but in the way of someone who understood that careful and slow were not the same thing, and tucked the boy inside his jacket so that his own body heat was the primary insulation. She watched this and felt something tighten in her chest that was not cold. She had chosen Earth for a reason. She had calculated many things in the 14 days since the Empire fell, had run scenarios in her mind with the constant low-level computation that had defined her adult life, mapping possibilities and counter-possibilities against each other, with the practiced exhaustiveness of someone who understood that the scenario you didn't model was always the one that found you. But she had not modeled this. This particular variable, a human moving through a frozen wilderness with her child pressed against his heart and making no demands about it, had not appeared in any scenario she had constructed. She moved alongside him. Her left arm was functionless. Her legs were uncertain. She kept moving. "You chose to come here," Calloway said. He was watching the terrain ahead, not her. "This specific planet." "Yes." "Why here?" "Out of everything available." And she had not planned to explain this to anyone. She had planned to land undetected, recover, and work alone. None of that plan had survived the crash. She explained it anyway, because he had asked directly, and because something in the way he moved told her he would not use information carelessly. "Your world does not appear on Imperial cartography," she said. The cold made speaking effortful. She kept her sentences precise. "There are 17,000 catalog star systems in Surfian Imperial records. Earth is not among them. The survey ships that passed this region classified your sun as unremarkable and your planet as pre-contact. No strategic value, no listed resources of imperial significance." She breathed. They were not wrong about the resources. They were profoundly wrong about the value. Calloway was quiet for a few steps. "You hit on the one map nobody bothered to finish." "Yes. That's either very smart or very desperate." "It was both," she said. "Most useful decisions are." Something shifted briefly in his expression, controlled and real, there and then, not there. They were approximately 200 meters from the crash site when the sound reached her, low and electronic. The specific frequency signature of a rotational scan array running a target acquisition pattern. She knew it the way a person knows the sound of their own name spoken in another room. She stopped walking. "Down," she said. Calloway was already moving, already reading her reaction with the speed of someone whose survival had historically depended on reading reactions correctly. He dropped behind an outcropping of snow-packed rock. Kale held against him, and she went down beside them, her body cooperating with more urgency than it had managed in the past hour because urgency, it turned out, was a more effective stimulant than warmth. The drone came over the ridgeline from the west, triangular, black, moving in the slow, methodical pattern of a search grid, sweeping left and then right, its sensor array tilted downward at the angle of active acquisition, not passive observation. It was a military-grade machine moving with military-grade purpose. It was approximately 40 meters out, closing on a heading that would bring it directly over their position within 90 seconds. Mara's mind went to work. She assessed the drone's approach angle against the terrain, mapped its sensor sweep pattern against the geometry of their cover. Her left arm was non-functional, which removed certain options. Her mind was not non-functional, which retained all the ones that mattered. She had spent 19 years turning limited resources into decisive advantages. The calculus here was not complicated. What it required was precision. It tracks heat signatures as primary acquisition data, she said very low. Its sensor array has a field narrowing flaw in the 60 to 75 degree approach angle, a calibration gap that creates a 4-second lag before target lock confirms. If you place heat sources at 3 separate points in the northwest, northeast, and due east, its targeting system will register competing signatures and enter a priority resolution sequence. She watched the drone's movement, measured. In the 4 seconds before it resolves priority, it will not be processing its current position. That is your window. Calloway was watching the drone without looking away from it. What do you need me to do specifically? Your pack, signal flares, 3 of them in the directions I described. Give it sources to choose from. She looked at his belt. She had cataloged everything on his person when he first appeared. You have an EMP device, standard issue for drone disruption, law enforcement grade. When it commits to one of the flares, you will have approximately 7 seconds before it confirms the flare as non-biological and redirects. Throw the EMP to intercept. He looked at her once, a single, complete look. Then he had the flare gun out. Call the shots, he said. She watched the drone, measured its approach against the geometry, waited through 3 full-breathed cycles. Northwest, she said. The first flare went 60 meters to the northwest in a long, flat arc, catching and burning white-orange against the gray of the sky, bright and insistent. The drone paused, its scan array shifted. Northeast. The second flare went northeast, and the drone's hover pattern broke visibly, a small, involuntary stagger as competing heat signatures registered simultaneously in the acquisition system. 2 sources of equal priority suddenly demanding resolution. East, full distance. The third flare went due east, the farthest of the 3, and the drone turned, committed, descended toward the brightest and farthest source with the decisive movement of a system that had resolved its priority calculation. Now, she said. Calloway threw the EMP in a long, smooth arc. The device detonated midair with a sound she felt more than heard, a pressure in the sinuses, a disruption in the frequency of everything electrical within its radius. The drone went rigid. Its rotors ceased. It fell into the snow 14 meters away with the absolute finality of a machine that had stopped believing its own instructions and lay without moving. Silence. Then wind. Only wind, and Kayel's slow breathing against Calloway's chest. Calloway exhaled, a single controlled release. Mara was already moving toward the wreckage. Her legs were still not at full reliability, but they were better, and she moved with the economical purpose of someone who understood that post-engagement analysis was not optional. She crouched over the drone's broken body and found the identification module casing in the undercarriage. Her fingers were returning to function with the warmth the thermal blanket had been building, and they worked the panel with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been opening equipment casings since before this man was likely old enough to carry his first pack. She looked at what was inside. The imperial glyph at the center of the command board was Surfian Standard. The authentication code was Surfian Fleet Command Encryption. 9th generation. She recognized it without needing to confirm it, the way you recognize work you did with your own hands, because she had personally commissioned the 9th generation encryption protocol 4 years ago. She had overseen its architecture. She had signed the implementation orders. She knew every layer of it because she had made every layer of it. This drone had not come from an outside enemy, not a rival power, not a border faction, or a contracted bounty operation. This drone had come from someone with access to fleet-grade Surfian, military hardware and command-level authentication. Someone who had been at the center of imperial power and had retained that position's resources when the power itself changed hands. There was only one person that description fit. She stood up slowly. Calloway was watching her face. He did not ask what she had found. He waited in the specific way of someone who understood that information forced out of sequence was often information corrupted. The Empire did not fall to an outside attack, she said. Her voice was steady. That steadiness cost her something real, something she paid without acknowledgement. I had known there were enemies, external pressures, border conflicts, the ordinary friction of an empire that had expanded perhaps farther and faster than was wise. But the strike that destroyed the capital, the network shutdown, the coordinated timing of every failure on the same night. She looked at the drone in the snow. That required someone inside, someone with complete knowledge of our command architecture. Every defensive protocol, every redundancy, every system, and how it connected to every other system. Calloway said nothing. There was one person I trusted completely with that knowledge, she said. One person I had brought into the inner architecture of our entire defensive network across 19 years of partnership. One person who knew every vulnerability because I had shown him every vulnerability. Because I trusted him with the same trust you extend to someone who has stood beside you through everything and never given you reason to question it. She looked at the drone. His name is Dren Voss. He was my second in command for 11 years, my closest colleague, the officer whose judgment I relied on in every situation where my own judgment needed testing. She paused. And he is the one who burned everything to the ground. Calloway was quiet. How certain are you? This authentication code is from a command-level encryption architecture I designed personally. 3 people in the Empire had full access to it. I am one. The other 2 are dead. I confirmed their deaths before I fled. She looked up. The sky above the Brooks Range was gray and vast. He is not coming for me because I am a fugitive. He is coming for me because I am the only person alive who can prove what he did, and because I know the architecture of every system he now controls. She met Calloway's gaze. Every weakness, every flaw, every 11-second window in every defensive system he inherited from me. Calloway looked at the drone, looked back at her. So you're not just running, he said. No, she said. She thought of Cale still tucked against this stranger's chest, his breathing deeper now, more regular. She thought of 19 years of service and the officers she had led, who were gone now because of one man's ambition and her own failure to see what had been standing beside her the entire time. She thought of the plan she had been building in her mind for 14 days, running it and revising it and running it again, because the mind that had made her the architect could not stop being the architect simply because there was no longer an empire behind it. The architecture of thought did not require an army to function. It only required a problem. And she had one. I came here because I needed time and distance and a location that would not appear in his search parameters, she said. I came here because your world is not on his maps. She met Calloway's eyes directly, fully, the way she met the eyes of anyone she was about to trust with something she could not afford to have mishandled. And I came here because I intend to finish this. He studied her for a long moment. This woman who had crashed into his search district, who was half frozen and had a dislocated shoulder, and had just run a counter-drone engagement and with the calm precision of someone conducting a training exercise, and who was now looking at him with the expression of someone who had made a decision and was informing him of it as a professional courtesy. He said, the radar installation at my base picked up something in the upper atmosphere about 20 minutes before I found you. Large signature. Moving slow. Her blood went cold in a different way than the weather had managed. How large? The kind of large that requires a different category than anything that category was designed for. She looked at the cloud cover to the west, the particular thickening and coloration that she recognized as something other than weather. Then we have less time than my original calculation assumed, she said. How much less? She looked at the drone in the snow. Looked at the sky. Hours, she said, not days. Calloway picked up his pack, adjusted Kale against his chest and checked the boy's face with a brief, practiced touch that confirmed temperature without disturbing rest. Looked at her with a steadiness that she would, over the coming days, come to understand was not performed. It was simply who he was. Then we move now, he said. Yes, she said, we do. She fell into step beside him, and the snow continued to fall across the Brooks Range, covering the drone in the ice and the crash scar on the mountainside, erasing evidence with the indifferent thoroughness of weather that had no stake in what had happened there. And above the cloud cover that was not clouds, something immense and dark and patient continued its slow orbit, its sensor arrays sweeping the surface below in widening spirals. And inside its command deck, a man who had once been the second most powerful person in an empire sat in a chair that did not belong to him and waited. He did not know yet what he was dealing with. He was about to find out. Part 2. The weight of the choice. The Fairbanks installation was not on any public map. That was the first thing Mara noticed. The second was that the people inside it moved the way combat veterans moved, which was to say they did not move unnecessarily. Every step carried purpose. Every glance conveyed information. These were people who had been taught, at some point in their lives, that wasted motion was a form of arrogance, an assumption that you had more time than the situation was going to give you. Garrett Calloway had not explained much during the 4-hour drive south from the crash site. He had kept the heat running at maximum. He had handed back a thermos of something dark and bitter that Mara drank without asking what it was, because it was warm, and warmth was, at that moment, more important than familiarity. He had made 3 radio calls in a language that was clipped and coded in ways she did not know specifically, but recognized in structure. The shorthand of people who communicated in high-stakes environments and had refined their language down to what was necessary. Cale had woken up somewhere on the road. He had looked at Calloway driving, at the snow outside the window, at his mother in the passenger seat with her arm immobilized against her chest. He had said very quietly in Surfian, "Are we safe?" Mara had said also in Surfian, "Not yet, but we are closer than we were." He had absorbed that, nodded once with the pragmatic seriousness that was one of his most purely inherited traits, and gone back to sleep. Now he was in a medical bay 2 quarters away, attended by a human physician who had not asked a single unnecessary question about his physiology before beginning to assess and treat, which told Mara that Calloway had briefed ahead, had communicated what to prepare for, had extended his commitment to them beyond the moment of rescue into the infrastructure of what came next. She noted this without commenting on it. The noting was sufficient. She sat at a steel table in a room with no windows. Her shoulder had been set by the same physician, who had done it with efficiency and without the quality of hesitation that would have told her he was uncertain. The pain was considerable. It was also organized now, the clarified pain of something correctly treated rather than the chaotic pain of something wrong. And organized pain was manageable in a way that chaos was not. A woman in her 50s had entered 20 minutes ago. Close-cropped gray hair, the bearing of someone who had spent decades in rooms where decisions had consequences, and the specific directness of someone who had stopped having time for preamble somewhere around her 3rd decade of service. She had introduced herself as Director Elaine Marsh and said, "I need to understand exactly what we're facing." So Mara had told her, precisely, completely, and without the softening that would have made it easier to hear but less useful to act on. The fall of the Surfian Empire, the nature of fleet-class warship technology, and what it could do to an undefended planet. The AI targeting architecture, the shield regeneration cycles, the weapon systems and their effective ranges. The specific capabilities of the vessel now in orbit, which she knew in detail because she had overseen the construction of that vessel class 6 years ago and had made certain decisions about its architecture that were about to become relevant. She explained Dren Voss, his intelligence, which was considerable, his resources, which were those of an empire he had stolen, his patience, which was his defining characteristic and the thing that had made him, for 23 years, the most effective second-in-command she could have asked for, because patience in service of someone else's strategy was invaluable, and patience in service of your own ambition it turned out was devastating. Marsh had listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, she said only, "How long do we have before he stops waiting?" "He gave a 24-hour ultimatum," Mara said. "He will not extend it. Voss considers extensions a signal of weakness, and he has spent his entire career treating the appearance of strength as a strategic asset. At the 24-hour mark, he will begin his attack sequence." She paused. "That gives us time. Not generous time, but time." Marsh had stood, said nothing further, and left. An hour later, the screens came on, not only in this facility, everywhere simultaneously. Mara watched through a monitor feed as every broadcast on the continent flickered and synchronized. Phones, televisions, emergency broadcast systems, public displays in cities across the hemisphere, all of them carrying the same signal. The sky outside the facility, she was told, had changed. The warship had dropped to low orbit, the black crescent of it visible to the naked eye from any point on the eastern seaboard, a second horizon where no horizon should exist, moving slowly across the stars with the patience of something that had never needed to hurry. And then the face appeared. She had not seen Dren Voss in 14 days. She had known him for 23 years. She read his face now the way she had always read it, looking not at the surface of his expression, but at the operational state beneath it, the true condition of the person behind whatever he was displaying. He looked, she thought, exactly as he always had. That was the particular quality of people like Voss. They did not change when they became what they had always been underneath. They simply stopped expending energy on the concealment. He spoke in Surfian. The broadcast translated instantly into English, the words carrying across every language on the planet in the same moment. "This planet harbors a fugitive of the Surfian Command Authority. She carries with her knowledge vital to Imperial reconstruction. Surrender her within 24 hours, and your civilization will be classified as a protected, non-contact world. Your infrastructure, your cities, your people, all of it untouched." A pause that was not uncertainty but emphasis. "Refuse, and we will begin with your orbital infrastructure. Everything that connects you to one another. We will begin there and work inward until compliance is achieved." The broadcast ended. In the silence that followed, the facility around Mara shifted. The quality of movement changed in the hallways beyond her door. People began moving faster, and not in the way that indicated panic. In the way that indicated a decision had been made about what to do next. Calloway appeared in the doorway. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, eyes on the monitor. "Is he telling the truth?" he said. "About leaving the planet alone if we hand you over?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Voss does not lie when the truth serves him equally well," she said. "If he says he will preserve this world in exchange for my surrender, he means it. Not from mercy, because destroying an inhabited planet is costly, and he has no strategic reason to pay that cost when compliance achieves the same result." She paused. "The offer is genuine." Calloway was quiet. "But you're not going to tell me to take it." "This is not my world," she said. "I have no claim on your people's choices. I am not in a position to tell you anything." She met his eyes. "I can only tell you that if you choose not to take it, I have a plan. And that the plan, while difficult, is not impossible." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled the chair across from her and sat down. "Tell me the plan," he said. She had been building it for 14 days, running it through the same mind that had planned 19 years of fleet operations, that had mapped the terrain of every engagement she had ever entered with the exhaustive attention of someone who understood that the variable you didn't account for was always the one that found you. This plan was different from any she had built before because the resources were different, and because the enemy was someone who knew how she thought, which meant she had to think differently than she ever had. The Surfian warship's AI operated on a centralized architecture. That was its defining strength and its defining limitation. Everything ran through a primary cognitive core that integrated sensor data, targeting calculations, shield management, and weapons discharge into a single, seamlessly coordinated system. Against another military vessel, it was effectively invulnerable. The reaction times exceeded anything biological. The adaptability was extraordinary. But the central architecture had a feature that was, in isolation, a strength, and in the right conditions, a catastrophic liability. It recalibrated. Every 11 seconds, the system ran a full-spectrum sensor refresh, a complete reset of incoming data integrated into the current operational picture. This prevented sensor drift, eliminated ghost readings, maintained targeting precision across sustained engagements. It was, from an engineering perspective, elegant. She had admired it when the specifications were presented to her. She had approved it. She had also flagged it 6 years ago as a theoretical vulnerability. The recalibration period was a gap, tiny and invisible in any normal combat context because no conventional enemy could generate enough simultaneous data input to exploit it meaningfully. She had been told it was an acceptable theoretical risk. She had agreed with that assessment. The assessment had been made before Earth's internet existed in her calculations. The system can be overwhelmed, she said, not with weapons, with information. If we flood the sensor arrays with enough simultaneous signals of enough different types, the recalibration cycle will extend. The system will not fail. It is too sophisticated for a simple failure, but it will slow. And if we can coordinate a targeted strike during the slowdown, aimed specifically at the sensor calibration hardware rather than the shields or weapon systems, we can achieve temporary blindness. Calloway had been listening with the quality of attention she had already come to associate with him, not passive, constructive, building something in his mind as she spoke. How much data volume? He said. More than one government could generate alone, more than any single military or communications network. We would need your entire digital infrastructure operating simultaneously as a directed signal. She paused. Every system your civilization produces, coordinated. He was quiet for a moment. You want to weaponize the internet. I want to use it as a delivery system, yes. Something moved in his expression, not amusement exactly, something older than amusement. The look of someone encountering a problem from an angle they hadn't considered and finding the angle unexpectedly familiar. You have no idea what the internet actually is, he said. Explain it to me. He did. It took 20 minutes, and at the end of it, she understood three things. First, that the volume of simultaneous signal that Earth's digital infrastructure could generate was significantly larger than her initial estimate. Second, that much of that volume was, by any rational standard, completely without content or purpose, which paradoxically made it more effective as a jamming medium, not less. Third, that the human species had, apparently by accident, built the single most effective electronic warfare tool in this region of the galaxy and had been using it primarily to share images of their pets. She revised her probability estimates upward. The next 18 hours were unlike anything in her operational experience, which was saying something. Calloway made calls, Marsh made calls. Those calls generated more calls, which generated others, and within 3 hours, the Fairbanks facility had become a node in a network that was expanding across the continent and then the world. She watched it happen on screens. Military officials contacted civilian engineers they had never spoken to before. University departments received emergency authorizations. Private technology companies were redirected from their ordinary operations and pointed at a problem they had never been asked to solve. And then something happened that she had not anticipated. People who had not been asked started helping anyway. A graduate student in Michigan who had been working on signal interference as a personal research project uploaded his entire catalog within 40 minutes of being contacted by someone who had heard about it from someone who had been contacted by someone 2 steps removed from Marsh's office. 2 telecommunications companies that had been in active litigation against each other for 7 years merged their satellite access infrastructure overnight. A retired electrical engineer in rural Montana drove 4 hours through a snowstorm to a transmission tower he had built on his own land and handed over the access codes without being asked more than once. Mara watched all of this through feeds and data streams. She watched the network grow, lateral and uneven, and without a single coordinating authority above it, built by people choosing to participate rather than people ordered to comply. This is not how your species normally functions, she said to Calloway. When he appeared with food she did not recognize and ate anyway because protein was protein. We're usually terrible at this, he agreed. What changed? He thought about it with the seriousness the question deserved, which she appreciated. The problem got large enough that he said that the things we were fighting about stopped feeling like they were worth the cost of continuing to fight about them. He looked at the screen showing the expanding network. It's temporary. We'll go back to the regular arguments. We always do. But in the moment, he paused. In the moment, we remember what the arguments were actually supposed to be protecting. She was quiet, thinking about this. She thought about the empire, about unity enforced through hierarchy, maintained through the authority of the command structure, rather than the commitment of the people inside it. It had worked for 3 centuries. It had built something vast and durable, an achievement by any measure. And then one man had found the single load-bearing seam in it and pulled. And the whole construction had come apart in a single night. Because unity that exists in the structure rather than in the people has no resilience. When the structure breaks, there is nothing underneath it to hold. She had not thought about that particular distinction before. It was landing differently now, in a facility in Fairbanks, watching people who had never been organized by anyone choose to organize themselves. Then the Global Council convened and the distinction became very immediate. The meeting was conducted via secure connection across 17 countries. Faces of representatives and military commanders arranged in a grid on the largest screen in the facility. Director Marsh represented the American position. Others spoke for their governments with the careful language of people who were trying to be rational about something for which rationality was necessary but not sufficient. Mara had estimated a majority in favor of compliance with Voss's demand. She had built her planning around that assumption because it was the rational response of civilizations facing a technologically superior existential threat. The rational choice, from outside her specific knowledge, was to give Voss what he asked for and preserve what could be preserved. The vote was 5-3 in favor of surrender. The arrest order came 20 minutes later. She was in her room when Calloway appeared in the doorway. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You anticipated this," he said. "I calculated it as likely," she said. "I designed the plan to operate without the cooperation of a unified global authority. I need access to infrastructure, not permission to use it. Those are different requirements." He looked at the order on his phone. "I took an oath," he said. Not quickly, deliberately, the way he did everything. "When I was 22 years old, standing in a room that smelled like floor wax and bad coffee, I swore to protect people who couldn't protect themselves." He looked at her. Not a specific country, not a specific command structure. People. He put the phone in his pocket. "I've been thinking for the past 6 hours about whether you count." She waited. "You do," he said, "and so does he." A nod toward the corridor where the medical bay was, where Cale was sleeping. He picked up his jacket. "I have 12 former Rangers in this country who owe me. 3 facilities that aren't on any government registry. We'll move tonight." She stood. "Cale, already being moved. I made the arrangements before I came to tell you." He said it without apology. "I figured you'd say yes. You assumed I'd trust your judgment. I assumed you were smart enough to know when you didn't have a better option." A pause. "And I assumed you'd been paying attention to who I am since I found you in the snow, and that your read of me was accurate." She had been. She thought of Cale wrapped first. She thought of the single operational question that cut straight to what mattered. She thought of the way he had said call the shots and then done exactly what she called. No hesitation, no negotiation. "Yes," she said. "I have been." He nodded. "Then let's go." They moved through 3 facilities in 48 hours. The signal flood was already running. Calloway had structured the civilian network's connections laterally rather than through the chain of command that had just voted to end this differently, which meant the arrest order could not interrupt the infrastructure without disconnecting the defense. Before they left Fairbanks, Mara asked to be connected to the main operations screen for 20 minutes. She used the time to walk the assembled technical teams through the communications architecture of the Surfian Fleet-class warship. Specifically, she described the command-level communication channel that she had designed into the ship's architecture 8 years ago during the construction review of the vessel class that became Voss's flagship. "It is not a back door," she explained, to the room of engineers and signals officers who were listening with the focused attention of people who understood that what they were hearing might be the most important technical briefing of their lives. "It is a direct communication channel built into the ship's internal network at the command architecture level. It exists below the normal operational frequency spectrum. It was designed for situations where a commander needed to address personnel directly without using the main communication system. She paused. Access requires command-level biometric authentication. Voss cannot use it. He does not have my biometric profile. He cannot replicate it. She looked at the room. Because I designed the channel, I also designed the protocol that runs beneath it. Every transmission on that frequency, incoming or outgoing, logs a point of origin signature. The person on the other end of a transmission on this channel will not know this is happening. The logging is passive and does not trigger any notification in the ship's main system. She let that land for a moment. Any transmission Voss makes on that frequency, attempting to use it, or any transmission on any frequency that the channel's trace protocol detects as originating from the same command deck will be fully locatable. She looked at Marsh. I will know exactly where he is calling from. The room was quiet. I will also tell you this, she said. There are officers aboard that warship who did not choose to serve Voss. Some were reassigned by force when he took command. Some remained aboard because leaving was not an option that was offered to them. I have known some of these officers for 20 years. She paused. They have not been idle. She did not explain further. Not yet. 12 hours after they left Fairbanks, operating from a facility whose location she was not told, and did not ask because operational security was operational security regardless of which side of the war you were on, Mara watched the signal flood hit the warship. The sensor data Callaway's technical team had been pulling from the warship's passive communication leakage was precise enough to show her what she needed. The AI recalibration cycles were extending from 11 seconds to 14 to 17. The system was processing incoming signal volume that exceeded its design parameters, not by enough to crash it, but by enough to slow it. The adaptation was occurring, as she had expected it would, because the system was sophisticated and adaptive. But adaptation consumed resources, and resources directed toward cognitive defense were resources not available for weapons. She adjusted the signal parameters. Voss adjusted the ship's filtering response. She adjusted again, redirecting through different frequency bands, forcing the ship's system to track multiple simultaneous changes. The engagement was invisible, conducted entirely in the language of frequency and mathematics, but it was as real and as consequential as anything she had ever fought. Then Voss did something she had not predicted. The strike on Nevada came at 3:47 in the morning. A single weapons discharge, precisely targeted at a military installation in the high desert outside Hawthorne. Callaway had flagged the facility 6 hours earlier during the second facility transfer as the most likely secondary target based on its satellite uplink profile and its visibility to the warship's sensor arrays. He had made one call. The installation had been evacuated within 90 minutes. No one had questioned the authority behind the call because Callaway's name still opened certain doors that the arrest order had not yet thought to close. No casualties. The installation was gone. A crater in the Nevada desert where there had been buildings. And then the transmission. Not to the world this time. To her specifically, on a channel that only someone with Surfian Imperial Command knowledge would know she was monitoring, embedded in the passive communication leakage she had been tracking. Voss spoke in Surfian, very quietly, in the register he used when he was not performing for an audience. I know you're still there, Mara. I know what you're building. Stop building it. Give me what I came for, and I will leave this world exactly as I found it. I will not harm the child. I will not harm you. I will take only what I came for, and I will go. A pause. You know I am not lying. You have always known when I was lying. 23 years. Not once did you fail to read it. This is not that. She sat in the silence of the Yukon facility they had moved to and listened to the snow against the windows and thought about the fact that he was right. She had always known when Voss was lying. The specific quality of it, the almost imperceptible change in the cadence of his speech, had been visible to her since the third year of their partnership. He was not lying now. He meant exactly what he said. He would take her back. He would use everything she knew to consolidate his hold on what remained of the empire. She would live. KL would live. And she would spend the rest of her life watching a man who had destroyed everything she had built use the architecture of what she had created to maintain a power that was founded on betrayal, while the officers who had served her loyally and the civilizations that had once existed under the Empire's protection had no one to speak for them. She sat with that. Calloway came and stood in the doorway. She did not know how long he had been there or how much he had heard. "He offered me a genuine way out," she said. "I know. The offer is real." "I know that too." She looked at the data screens. The signal flood still running. The warship's recalibration cycles at 17 seconds and holding. "When I was 19 years old," she said, "I chose to serve the Empire. Not because I was required to, because I believed in what it was built to be, what it was meant to protect." She was quiet for a moment. "I spent my entire career defending something I believed had worth, and I was wrong about the man standing beside me. The cost of that error is something I will be calculating for the rest of my life." Calloway said nothing. "If I accept his offer," she said, "I am choosing survival at the cost of everything that should not be permitted to survive through me. I am choosing to let him win not because he was right, but because he was willing to do things I was not." She looked at Calloway. "I have made a great many decisions based on calculation. This one I am making differently." He met her eyes. "What do you need?" he said. She turned back to the screen. "The satellite network. How complete?" 83% as of 90 minutes ago. "I need it at 100. She opened the planning schematic she had been building for 36 hours. The distributed targeting architecture that was not in any military handbook, because no military had ever had these resources to work with. "And I need 6 hours." He looked at the schematic. She watched the moment he understood what it was. "You're going to hit it during the recalibration window," he said, "during an extended recalibration window. The signal flood will push the cycle to approximately 22 seconds by the time we're ready. If we fire the satellite network in a precisely timed coordinated burst during that extension, aimed at the sensor calibration array rather than the shields, you blind it. Temporarily? Yes, long enough." He was quiet. "And then?" She met his eyes. "Then I finish what I started." He nodded, one complete, unqualified nod. He picked up his radio and started making calls. Outside, the snow continued to fall across the Yukon dark, and somewhere above the cloud cover, a warship that had never retreated from anything held its orbit and waited. And the 11-second window that had been deemed an acceptable theoretical risk began, for the first time in its operational history, to feel like something else. It began to feel like the thing it had always actually been, a door. Part 3. The Architect's War. The satellite network completed at 4:23 in the morning. Mara knew the exact moment because she had been watching the deployment counter for 6 hours, tracking each new node as it came online, each small and unremarkable device taking its position in the orbital web she had designed. Only any one of them was negligible. A scientific instrument, a communications relay, something that would not survive 30 seconds in a conventional military engagement. Together, timed correctly, firing in the precise sequence she had calculated down to the millisecond, they were something the Surfian Empire had no doctrine for, because the Surfian Empire had never fought a civilization that didn't have a fleet. She stood and moved to the window of the facility. The sky was still dark, the stars hard and clear at this altitude, each one precise and separate, and somewhere among them, dressed in orbital silence, the warship completed its slow circle. She looked at it for a long moment, not with the eyes of someone afraid of what it represented, but with the eyes of someone who had designed the thing it created and understood, better than anyone else alive, exactly where the design was incomplete. Calloway came in without announcing himself. They had both stopped treating that formality as necessary somewhere in the second day. "Network is confirmed at 100%, he said. "Ground stations synchronized. I have people at 17 relay points across 4 continents waiting for your signal." "The data flood?" "Running for 11 hours. The warship's recalibration cycles are averaging 19 seconds. "It will reach 22, she said. "The system is still adapting to volume. It hasn't plateaued yet." She turned from the window. "We have approximately 40 minutes before Voss moves." "How do you know 40? "Because his ultimatum expires in 43 minutes, and he does not extend ultimatums," she said. "At the 43-minute mark, he will initiate his attack sequence. We need to move before he does, which means we move in 38. He picked up his radio. She went to check on Kyle. The boy was awake. sitting up on the narrow cot in the side room they had given him, wrapped in 2 blankets, eating from a bowl with the focused concentration of someone who had decided the food was interesting and worthy of attention. He looked better. The deep cobalt had returned to his skin, replacing the gray that had frightened her. His silver hair was still entirely unmanaged, which was characteristic. He looked up when she came in. She sat on the edge of the cot and looked at him without speaking. He looked back at her with the directness that children had before the world taught them to approach things indirectly. "Are we going to win?" he said. She considered the measured answer, the honest but careful answer, the one calibrated to keep him functional without overburdening him. She looked at her son. "Yes," she said. He nodded, confirming something he had apparently already believed. "Garrett said you built something," Cale said. "Something in space. I designed it. Many people built it." He processed this with the slow seriousness of a 6-year-old working through a concept at the edge of his understanding. "Is it like what you used to do when you commanded the fleet?" "It is like that," she said. "Yes." He nodded again. Then he reached out and took her right hand with both of his small ones and held it with a seriousness that matched his expression. "Then we're going to win," he said, simply. The certainty of a person who had watched someone do difficult things for his entire life and had not yet learned to question whether difficult and impossible were the same. She sat with him for 4 minutes. She counted them without deciding to, because her mind ran the count the way it ran everything, automatically and without permission. But she was present in a way she had not always been when the empire was whole, and there was always something requiring her attention somewhere else. She was there, with him, in the room. Then she kissed the top of his head, stood up, and went back to the war. The operations room had filled while she was with Cale. Calloway had assembled everyone available, his people, Marsh's team, connected via secure link from Fairbanks. Technical teams in 7 countries, faces arranged in the main display, all waiting. Engineers who had not slept in 30 hours. Signals operators who had been running the data flood on manual oversight for the past 6 hours and were running on the specific fuel of people who understood that what they were doing mattered in a way that nothing they had done before it had. She stood at the front of the room. She had addressed rooms like this 10,000 times. The briefing before an engagement. The moment when all the preparation stopped and the execution began. She had learned early that people who understood not just what they were doing, but why, could improvise when the plan met reality and reality refused to cooperate. She had always told her officers everything they needed to know to act without her if they had to. "I will explain exactly what we are doing and why each element matters," she said. "When I have finished, there will be no questions, because there will not be time. You will execute." The room was completely quiet. "The warship's AI operates on a centralized recalibration cycle," she said. "Every 19 to 22 seconds, it resets its sensor integration. During that window, it is processing prior data. It is not acquiring new targets. It is not updating its threat assessment." She moved to the schematic on the main screen. "Here, the sensor calibration array, located on the ventral surface of the ship between the primary shield emitters. It is not heavily armored because it was never designed as a combat component. No one has ever had a reason to attack it specifically." She looked at the room. "We are going to attack a maintenance component with 17,000 satellites." The room absorbed that. "The signal flood you have been running will push the recalibration cycle to its maximum extension. When I give the command, you will increase the flood volume by 40%. This will trigger an emergency recalibration. The system will enter an extended reset cycle. I estimate 22 seconds. We design for 18 and accept what we are given." She paused. "During that window, the satellite network fires, every node, simultaneously. The burst is not designed to destroy the ship. It is designed to hit the sensor array at a specific frequency that disrupts its calibration hardware. Not permanently, long enough." She looked at Calloway. "While the ship is blind, I will transmit on the command channel I described during the Fairbanks briefing," she said. "The channel I built into this vessel class 8 years ago, designed for command-level direct communication below the normal operational spectrum." She paused. "What I did not describe in the Fairbanks briefing is that I have been using that channel for the past 48 hours. The room was very still. There are officers aboard that ship who have been waiting, she said. They have been waiting because they know who I am and what I stand for, because 20 years of service builds something between people that a change of command cannot simply overwrite. They have been waiting because I told them 2 days ago what I was building and when to act. She looked at the assembled faces. They know their part. They will execute it when they hear my signal. She looked at the clock. 26 minutes. We begin in 12, she said. Be ready. The room moved. Calloway appeared at her shoulder. The officer's inside, he said quietly. You've been coordinating with them for 2 days. Yes. You didn't tell me. No. She met his gaze directly. If I was wrong about what the signal meant, telling you would have offered false hope that I could not afford to offer. If I was right, telling you earlier would not have changed the preparation. It would only have given you more time to carry a variable you had no ability to influence. She paused. I was protecting your operational focus. He considered this. That's either very calculating or very considerate, he said. In my experience, she said, those are frequently the same thing. Something shifted in his expression, controlled and genuine at once, there and then put away. Then the clock hit 12 minutes and they both stopped talking. The final 12 minutes had the quality she had experienced before every major engagement of her career. Time moved with a hyper-clarity. Each second distinct, complete, weighted. She had learned not to fight that feeling and not to surrender to it either. She had learned to use it, to let the sharpness of those final minutes make her more precise rather than more tense. She sat at the primary console. The satellite network schematic spread across her screen, 17,000 nodes shown as points of light in a web around the planet. Each confirmed, each waiting. She checked the timing algorithm twice. It was correct both times. She checked it a third time because correct and certain were not the same thing, and she was not in the habit of confusing them. The data flood increased at the 8-minute mark, 40% additional volume. She watched the warship's recalibration data. The cycle extended 19 seconds, 21, 23, settling at 22. There it was. Calloway was standing behind her left shoulder. He did not speak. He did not offer encouragement. He was simply present in the way he had of being present without imposing, which she had come to understand was a form of support that cost him something and was offered without performance. At the 2-minute mark, she opened the command channel to her officers inside the ship and sent a single character in the code they had agreed on. Ready. The response came in 11 seconds. Ready. She looked at the clock. 90 seconds. She thought briefly about the Empire, about what it had been at its best, when the best of it had been real. The officers who had served beside her. The people who had believed in something larger than individual ambition and had given their best years to it. Some were gone. Some were waiting inside that ship for her signal. All of them had trusted her with something that could not be rebuilt if she got this wrong. She did not intend to get this wrong. 60 seconds. She placed her right hand on the command interface. The screen registered her biometric. The firing sequence initialized. 45 seconds. She looked up at Calloway once. He met her eyes with the steadiness that had been there from the first moment she saw him and had not changed through any of it, not through the phone or the drone or the long nights of preparation or the weight of everything that had been asked and given without complaint. She looked back at the screen. 20 seconds. She watched the recalibration data. The cycle began. The sensors reset. The window opened. She fired. All 17,000 satellites fired simultaneously, and the burst of coordinated energy that rose from Earth's orbital shell was not visible to any human eye and not detectable by any instrument that was, in that precise moment, capable of detecting anything, because the first thing it did was saturate the warship's sensor arrays with a frequency that the calibration hardware had never been designed to process. A frequency she had calculated across 3 sleepless nights, using design specifications only she still possessed. The warship went blind, not forever, not irreparably, for a window measured in seconds that she had calculated to the decimal point. She did not need forever. She opened the command channel and broadcast the signal. Full power. The frequency she had built into the ship's architecture 8 years ago. The channel below the operational spectrum, The one she had included because she was the kind of commander who designed contingencies for situations she hoped would never occur, and who had never imagined this particular one. Inside the warship, in the lower decks and secondary stations, in the auxiliary control room, that Voss had never fully integrated into his command structure, because he had come from fleet command, not from ship design. Officers who had been waiting in disciplined silence for 48 hours heard the signal they had been told to listen for. They moved. They had prepared. The weapons lockout code she had transmitted during their covert exchanges went into effect simultaneously, entered by 8 different hands in 8 different stations with the coordinated precision of people who had drilled the sequence until it was faster than conscious thought. The main weapons array went offline. On the command bridge, Voss turned to his console and found a ship that could not fire. Mara opened the video channel. His face appeared on her screen. She looked at him and he looked at her, and the 23 years of knowing each other were present in the space between their faces on the connection. Everything that had been built and everything that had been destroyed and everything that now could not be undone. She read his face the way she had always read it, not the surface, the thing underneath. He was tired, not defeated, not panicked, not even calculating in the way he usually was. The constant forward-working computation visible in his eyes when he was already 3 moves past the present moment. He was tired in the way of someone who had committed to something very large and was now sitting at the edge of what that something had actually cost. "You built something," he said, in Surfian, just the 2 of them, no broadcast, no audience. "I built several things," she said. "The satellite network is yours. The design is mine. Many people built it." He was quiet for a moment. "The command channel," he said. "I should have found it and closed it." "You knew I designed the communication architecture for this vessel class," she said. "You should have looked deeper. It is a fair criticism of your preparation." Something moved across his face that she did not have a precise word for in any language. "You were always better at this than I was," he said. "Yes," she said, "I was." He looked at his console, the weapons array dark. The sensors coming back online, the recalibration completing, the ship seeing again, but seeing a satellite network still in position, still charged, still ready to repeat what it had just done. And inside the ship, officers who had turned from him, and the command channel locked to a biometric he could not replicate. In the calculation he was running, the one she had known he would run, the one that added up all the variables and arrived at an answer that any honest strategist had to accept. "You cannot hold this position indefinitely," he said. "Your satellites have limited charge cycles. Your ground teams are exhausted. The signal flood is running on infrastructure not designed for sustained high-volume output." He looked at her. "You have won this moment, not the war." "I know," she said. "Then what do you want?" She had thought about this, in the long hours of preparation, in the margins of calculation, in the 4 minutes of sitting with her son's hand in hers. "You will withdraw from this system," she said, "completely. You will not return." He said nothing. "The officers who acted against you will be transferred to the ship's secondary shuttle and released into Earth's custody. You do not have sufficient loyal crew to manage the ship and manage prisoners. You know this. I know this." Still nothing. "And you will not attempt to broadcast on the command channel as you withdraw," she said. "Because if you do, the trace protocol will log your transmission origin in real time, and I will know your staging coordinates with complete precision." She held his gaze. "I already have a preliminary location from your transmission 2 days ago when you contacted me on the personal channel. Attempting to use it again will confirm it to the meter." She watched his face. He understood. Not that she was bluffing. She was not. He had spent 23 years learning to read her, and he was reading her now, and he knew she was not bluffing, because she never bluffed when the truth would do the same work. He understood that the channel he had designed to be private had logged his position every time he used it, that the advantage he thought he held in knowing she was monitoring had been in fact her advantage, that she had known where he was calling from before she finished the first conversation, that she had been letting him talk. The tiredness in his face shifted, became something she recognized from a different context, from the faces of officers who had been thoroughly outmaneuvered and knew it, and were deciding how to carry that knowledge with dignity. "You had me from the first transmission," he said. "From the third sentence," she said. "The first 2 were necessary for authentication confirmation." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed the channel. 20 minutes later, the warship rotated in its orbit, its drive engaged. It began to move away from Earth with the slow, deliberate movement of a vessel that was withdrawing in calculation rather than retreating in panic, measuring its options, planning its next positioning. The massive black crescent that had hung above Earth's atmosphere for 24 hours began visibly to diminish. On Earth, every screen that had been carrying crisis coverage for a day showed the same thing. An empty sky where the warship had been. The silence lasted 4 seconds. Then the world made a sound. Not a cheer exactly, something more complicated than that, deeper and less clean. The sound of 8 billion people releasing a breath they had been holding for 24 hours. And then beneath that, building. The sound of people who had been afraid and were no longer afraid, which was one of the most powerful sounds in the known universe and one that had no analog in any military acoustic database she had ever worked from. She sat at the console and listened to it come through the feeds from every continent. She sat still and let it arrive and did not perform any emotion she was not actually feeling, which meant she sat quietly because what she actually felt was not simple enough for any visible expression to carry accurately. Calloway put his hand briefly on her right shoulder. Not a dramatic gesture, a brief, solid contact that acknowledged something specific and then was done. He walked away and started making calls because there was still work to do. There was always still work to do, and he was not a person who confused the end of the crisis with the end of the work. She looked at the tracking data on her screen. The warship's drive signature, diminishing but present, moving outward on a heading that matched the staging coordinates she had identified from the transmission trace. She had told Voss she knew where he was going. She did. The coordinates were precise. She kept that to herself, not because she was uncertain about them, because plans in their early stages needed to be protected from the cold, the way all fragile things did, and she had learned to protect the things that mattered to her before she had learned almost anything else. An hour later, she went to get KL. He was still on his cot. Someone had brought him a second bowl of food, and he was eating it with the focused attention of a person who had decided the food was worth taking seriously. He looked up when she came in. "Did we win?" he said. "Yes," she said. "We won." He absorbed this. "Was it because of your plan?" "It was because of many things," she said. "The plan, the people who built what I designed, the officers aboard the ship who had been waiting for a signal." She sat down on the edge of the cot. "And a man who decided we were worth standing with when he had no reason to stand with anyone." Kyle considered this. "Garrett, yeah," he said. "Yes." "I like him," Kale said. "He's very quiet, but he pays attention to everything." She looked at her son. This small, blue-skinned boy who had come through the end of his world and a crash landing in a frozen wilderness, in weeks in unfamiliar facilities, eating unfamiliar food with the pragmatic adaptability of someone who had decided that what was in front of him was worth engaging with. She thought, not for the first time, that he was going to be extraordinary. "We're staying here," she said, "on this world, for the foreseeable future." He looked at her, processing. "Because it's safe here?" "Because I choose to," she said. "There is a difference. Safety is a condition. Choice is a commitment." He thought about that with the slow deliberateness of someone working through a distinction that mattered. "Okay," he said, and went back to his food. 3 weeks later, humanity did something that surprised her. She had anticipated the accelerated defense program, the emergency investment in orbital infrastructure, the military reorganization that followed an event of this magnitude. These were the rational responses of a civilization that had discovered it was not alone and had found the discovery clarifying rather than reassuring. She had anticipated and planned around all of them. She had not anticipated the beacon. The proposal came from a coalition of universities and research institutions and was approved by the Global Council in less time than she would have believed possible for a body that had recently demonstrated its capacity for deeply divided decisions. It was simple in design and complex in content. A signal broadcast outward on a wide-band frequency, carrying mathematics and music and art and history, and a sentence that a committee of linguists and engineers had worked on for 6 days to get right, and that someone on that committee had run by Mara in draft, which was how she had come to suggest the revision. The original draft had said, "We will defend ourselves." She had told them that defense was a posture and protection was a commitment. The committee had found the distinction useful. The final sentence, repeated in hundreds of languages in the loop at the end of every transmission cycle read, "We are here, we are watching, and we protect what is ours." She stood outside the evening the beacon went live and looked at the sky and did not perform the feeling the sentence gave her, which was not simple enough to perform and which she had not been expecting. She had been monitoring the response frequencies since the beacon launched, with the patient discipline of someone who had spent decades waiting for signals in the noise of open space. She had not told anyone. There was no point in explaining something that might not happen, and she had learned in the past weeks that humans needed hope to be concrete before they could hold it properly, and she did not want to offer something that might dissolve. But she had been listening. At 11:43 that evening, standing outside in the Yukon dark with the cold no longer bothering her in the way it once had, the console she had been watching registered a return frequency. Narrowband, encrypted in ninth-generation Surfian command protocol, a sequence she recognized not from analysis but from memory, the way you recognize something you have known for a long time, even when you have not encountered it recently. The recognition happening below the level of deliberate thought. She stood very still. She decoded it with hands that she did not allow to be unsteady. It took 40 seconds. The message was short. "Commander, we are here. We have been waiting. 17 ships. We heard you." She read it 3 times. 17 ships. Out of the entirety of what she had lost, everything that had burned in a single night in the capital system while she was running with her son in a stolen scout ship, jumping blind through space toward a planet that was not on anyone's map. 17 ships had survived. 17 crews, officers and personnel who had served under her, who had known, the way people who had worked closely with someone for a long time knew things, that she was still out there, who had held on. She sat with that for a long time, in the way she sat with the things that were too large for her usual speed of processing. Not with analysis, not with planning. Simply with what it was, which was the particular feeling of a door you believed was permanently closed opening quietly from the other side by someone who had been waiting on the other side all along. She had not lost everything. She had only lost sight of it in the cold. She did not tell Calloway that night. She would tell him, and soon, because what it meant for what came next would require his involvement in his specific set of capabilities, and she had learned over the past weeks that keeping information from him served neither of them. But tonight she held it for herself. This one quiet thing that was only hers, the way certain things needed to be held privately before they were ready to be shared. She held it and let it be what it was, which was the beginning of the next thing. And she had not been certain until this moment that there would be a next thing, and now she was certain. And certainty after that length of uncertainty had a weight she had not expected. She turned and walked back toward the light. Inside, Kyle was sleeping, one arm thrown out across his blanket, his silver hair finely combed. Calloway was at the communications station, already working. He looked up when she came in. "Tracking on Voss's drive signature is still clean," he said. "We've got a good fix on his heading." "I know," she said. She sat down across from him. "I want to talk to you about what comes next." He set down the radio. I figured that conversation was coming. It is not a short conversation. The good ones never are. He settled back in his chair with the ease of someone who had learned to be patient with processes that took as long as they took. "I've got time." She looked at him. This man with frost-weathered hands and gray-green eyes that had been steady from the first moment she'd seen them, and that she had come to understand were steady, not because nothing reached him, but because he had made a long time ago the decision about what he would allow to move him and what he would hold. She thought about the past weeks, about what she had learned, not in the tactical sense, not in the strategic sense, but in the deeper sense that she had not expected to be learning anything because she had not expected to survive long enough for learning to be relevant. She had believed, for most of her adult life, that unity required authority, that you had to construct a structure above people that held them in alignment, because people left to themselves would scatter in the directions of their individual interests. She had built her career on that belief. The empire had been built on that belief. It had worked for a long time in the way that things work when the alternative is unacceptable. And then the structure had broken, and there was nothing underneath it. What she had watched in this facility, and in the Fairbanks facility, And in the networks that had built themselves laterally across the planet in 48 hours was not that. There had been no structure above the people compelling them to cooperate. There had been only the situation and the choice each person made about what the situation required of them, and the choices had added up to something that the structure of the most powerful empire she had known had not managed to produce. I was wrong about something important, she said. Calloway waited. I believe that unity required authority above it, she said, that it had to be built into the structure so that the people inside the structure were held together whether they chose to be or not. I spent my career defending that model. She paused. What your people did when the warship appeared was not that. There was no authority compelling anyone. There was only the choice. We don't always choose well, he said. I know. I have been watching you for 3 weeks. Something moved in his expression. But when the choice mattered, she said, you chose. And the unity that comes from choosing is the only kind that survives when the structure breaks. Because it doesn't live in the structure. It lives in the people. She paused. I spent 19 years defending an empire that did not understand that distinction. I understand it now. He was quiet for a moment. For what it's worth, he said, I think you would have figured it out. Eventually, even without the crash. Why? Because you changed your understanding when the evidence requires it, he said. Most people don't, actually. They have a position and they protect it. You have a position and you test it. He looked at his hands. And because when your son asked you if you were going to win, you said yes without stopping to calculate whether it was statistically accurate. He looked up. That's not the behavior of someone who only believes in authority. She thought about that. He trusts me completely, she said. Yeah, Calloway said, and you deserved it. That's rarer than it sounds. She looked at the planning screen, at the staging coordinates she had identified, at the 17 ships that were waiting for her signal, scattered across distances she knew how to cross. Voss will rebuild, she said, with what remains of the fleet command structure and the resources he took when the capital fell. He has enough to establish a new base of operations. He will be more careful, more patient. He believes, I think, that he has time. She looked at Calloway. He is wrong about that. You're going after him. Not immediately. There is too much to build first, too much to understand about what resources I now have access to that I did not have before. She paused. But yes, I am going after him. How long? Long enough to do it correctly, she said. Long enough for Kyle to be older. Long enough to establish what the 17 ships need to be established before I can use them. She met his eyes. Long enough to learn what I still need to learn about how your species operates. Because what you did in the past 3 days is something I want to understand completely before I ask you to do anything like it again. He was quiet for a moment. Before you ask me, he said, not before you ask humanity. Yes, she said, before I ask you, specifically. He looked at the planning screen, at the coordinates, at the shape of what she was describing. You know, he said slowly, when I found you in the snow, I figured the job was search and rescue. Get you warm, get the kid warm, figure out the immediate threat. He paused. I did not figure the immediate threat was going to take 3 days and 17,000 satellites. No, she said, I imagine you did not. And I definitely didn't figure that solving it was going to lead to a longer conversation about what comes after. No. He was quiet for a moment. I need to know something, he said. She waited. Are you asking me because I'm useful, he said, or are you asking me because you trust me? She thought about that, thought about it with the seriousness it deserved, which was considerable, because it was the kind of question that only received one honest answer and then lived with you afterward. Both, she said. You are the most operationally capable person I have worked with in 19 years of command. She paused. And you are someone I trust. Those two things are not in conflict. He nodded slowly, the kind of nod that meant he had received the answer and had decided it was accurate. Then he reached inside his jacket and held something out to her. An old insignia patch, the fabric worn soft at the edges, the symbol of his former unit. Rangers. The word curved above an emblem that carried the particular design of something that meant we go where others won't and we stay when others leave. You don't have to take it, he said. It's just that you should have something that's yours while you're here. Something that says you belong somewhere. She looked at the patch. Then she took it. She held it in her right hand. The metal of the backing was cold, and then it wasn't, the warmth of her palm transferring into it by degrees. "Thank you," she said. He nodded, looked at the planning screen. "So," he said, "you want to walk me through the staging coordinates?" "Yes," she said, "I do." She opened the planning screen. She put the patch on the table where she could see it, and she began. Outside, the night was complete across the Yukon wilderness. The spruce trees dark at the fence line. The sky above them enormous and dense with stars. The kind of sky that reminded you that the space between things was not emptiness, but distance. And that distance was something a person with the right resources and the right determination could cross. In the side room, KL slept with one arm thrown out and his silver hair finely combed, dreaming whatever a 6-year-old who had come through the end of his world and found a new one dreamed about. Good things, she hoped, things with enough room in them for what he was going to become. In orbit, 17 ships held their positions in the dark, waiting for a signal that had already arrived, carrying everything they needed to know about where to go next and what to do when they got there. And in a facility in the Yukon, a woman who had lost everything and found it again in an unexpected place sat across from a man who had stood with her when he didn't have to, and they looked at a map of what came next, and they began.